read two things. One, following Sandy's lead, I'll read a letter, to be kind of cantilever into the next project. I'm sure it's the last one. And then I will read a poem, which didn't make the last book, but which is in our selected poems, in the collected poems, of course. So this is a letter to me, 1971, and this is James telling a little story about the kind of thing that happened to him. Dear Stephen, misty morning at 7:30. The mist almost a relief after days of fantastic clarity, if only weather-wise. Every brick, every blade distinct and rinsed in it. Quickly a schedule discovers itself. Before noon, trot over to the Morses for an hour at the piano with Robert. Bach and Fauré yesterday. Weber the day before. Weber the day before. Then back to sit in the sun or in the dentist's chair. At 5, over to Grace's, who, especially with one eye still in stitches, can absorb more attention than a lung can tar. I am reading a slim, deadpan, autobiographical work by Lord Berners aloud to her. It is he who had a piano built into the back seat of his Rolls Royce and was driven playing it through brutalized French villages wearing a white mask. Only painful shyness explains behavior like that. The trip home was something. Motor trouble kept us in Athens 7 hours. They herded us into buses and gave us lunch at the unspeakably horrid Asteria Beach Hotel. The daughter and son-in-law of a friend were on the plane. That didn't help. When we finally took off, already prostrate with fatigue, I'd been up since 5, I found myself sitting next to a maniac. A tall, doughy man, about my age, wearing 2 pairs of glasses, one extremely dark, who instantly produced a sheaf of papers and began to scribble in a sick chicken track hand. I glimpsed words like struggle and fate, capitalized, and once a whole phrase, the raisin loses its point. Soon he put the papers back into a small, battered aluminum valise. That's a handy suitcase, I said. We had already spoken when he sat down. He, not knowing when planes generally left for New York, had arrived at the airport by bus, just in time to get on ours. That made me furious. You should have phoned at least, I said. But then I wouldn't have made the plane, he pointed out. I've traveled a good deal, he added. This is how things work out for me most of the time. His aluminum case was originally made to hold roller skates, he now said. He bought it in Monastiraki, which is a flea market in Athens. Then he began talking about literature and great ideas. We talked for 2 hours. It was like the zoo story. I wanted to kill him. Nietzsche, Kazantzakis, Keeman Fryer, whose lectures he had heard. Start at the top of the mountain, go beyond the furthest extremes of human consciousness, risk exposing your soul to the cosmos like a raisin to the sun. I suggested he might learn something from Rilke, the modesty of whose early work seemed particularly appealing. He wrote down the name. Then I addressed to a closed door a little speech about how the great ideas, capital G-I, the great ideas, far from being the achievement of men of genius, or look what happens when they are, Nietzsche and Hitler, Einstein and Hiroshima, are the work of thousands of anonymous generations and take the form of those brain coral reefs, slow myths, and taboos which keep the shark from the shallows our children swim in. And now, if you don't mind, I have taken a pill and must try to get some sleep. No, I'm afraid that last is esprit d'escalier. One tries to be gentle to the nutty, and besides, one doesn't want to wake up with one's throat cut. I got to David Calstone's at 2 a.m., where a bottle of champagne was waiting. I know you can stay up much longer than 27 hours, but for me it was a record I'm still celebrating. Robert Morse is going through my poems. He doesn't approve of the very obscure ones, but it's too late to do anything about that. The only title that comes to me with many recommendations, Green Rooms is another possibility, of the so described emerald my mother gives me in a poem, you may recall, is Braving the Elements, which in turn chiefly refers to the end of Dreams About Clothes. I don't like titles that applaud the author's seriousness or whatever. Titles like Necessities of Life, or even, forgive me, Responsibilities, Yeats's great book. But with the B of E, with Braving the Elements, it would seem that the cliche does its habitual blessed work of mitigation. What do you think? Time to make a number of phone calls. The mist is now fog, a white, wet blanket. I wish you were here. Yours ever, James. This is a poem called Christmas Tree. Some of you will know it. I'm sorry, it's kind of hard to see. Maybe it's a shaped poem, and it's a Christmas tree, as seen, say, from the next room, the waiting room, say. The door jamb cuts off part of the tree, but otherwise it's identified by tree. It's in the voice of the tree, towards the very end of his life, in the voice of the Christmas tree, that is. His mother outlived him by several years. Christmas tree. To be brought down at last from the cold, sighing mountain, where I and the others had been fed, looked after, kept still, meant I knew, of course I knew, that it would be only a matter of weeks, that there was nothing more to do. Warmly they took me in, made much of me. The point from the start was to keep my spirits up. I could assent to that. For honestly, it did help to be wound in jewels, to send their colors flashing forth from vents in the deep, fragrant sables that cloaked me head to foot. Over me then they wove a spell of shining, purple and silver chains, eavesdripping tinsel, amulets, milagros, software of silver, a heart, a little girl, a Model T, two staring eyes. The angels, trumpets, Bud and B, the children's names, in clown-like capitals. Somewhere a music box whose tiny song, played and replayed, I ended before long by loving. And in shadow behind me, a primitive IV to keep the show going. Yes, what lay ahead was clear. The stripping, the cold street, my chemicals plowed back into the earth for lives to come. No doubt a blessing, a harvest, but one that doesn't bear now or ever dwelling upon. To have grown so thin, needles and bone, the little boy's hands meeting about my spine, the mother's voice, holding up wonderfully. No dread, no bitterness, the end beginning. Today's dusk room aglow for the last time with candlelight. Faces love lit, gifts underfoot. Still to be so poised, so receptive, still to recall, to praise.